Lightning fractured the summer sky white, a blade of pure electricity that split the clouds open and threw the entire San Francisco street into stark relief for one breathless second. Thunder shook the pavement beneath the buildings. The storm had come fast, breaking the muggy heat into cold rain that hammered down like bullets, streaming off car hoods and pooling in the gutters, turning the asphalt into a mirror of fractured light. Mia Hartley stood in the doorway of her cramped apartment on the 4th floor of a building that had been scheduled for demolition twice, one eye swollen completely shut, the flesh around it purple and yellow and sick. Purple handprints bruised her throat where hands had gripped her that morning, where fingers had pressed hard enough to leave marks that looked like they belonged to someone twice her size. She held her 6-year-old son Micah against her hip, his small body trembling against her ribs, his face buried in her shoulder. She could feel his heart racing. His fingers dug into her thin blouse like he was trying to hold on to something that might disappear. Below her window, 20 black SUVs lined the street in perfect formation, their engines running, exhaust rising into the rain. Men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles like shadows taking physical form, water streaming off their shoulders, their movements synchronized and slow. They wore expressions that belonged to people who had never been told no in their entire lives. The lead man, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, looked up at her window. His name was Marco, though she did not know that yet. Through the rain-soaked darkness, she could see the shape of his face, the weight of his attention turning toward her like a searchlight. Mia's hands shook. Not from cold. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees when the storm rolled in, but her shaking had nothing to do with the weather. On the kitchen table behind her, crumpled and worn from being read 100 times in the past 14 days, lay an eviction notice. The deadline was printed in red ink. 12 days. She had 12 days to produce $150,000 or her family would be removed from this apartment by force, their belongings thrown into the street, her son watching from some shelter while men tore apart the only home he had ever known. She had $2 in her pocket. $2. That was everything. The rain hammered harder, and she heard the sound of car doors closing below, a series of heavy thuds that seemed to echo up through the walls of the building. Footsteps on the stairs. Multiple sets. Moving slowly, taking their time, not rushing. Whoever was coming was certain they would be allowed entry. That certainty terrified her more than speed ever could. Micah whimpered against her shoulder. His small voice barely carried over the thunder and rain. "Mommy, I'm scared." She pressed her lips to the top of his head, breathing in the smell of his shampoo, the same cheap bottle she bought from the discount store because it was all she could afford. "Sure, baby. I'm right here. You're safe." But she was lying. She was doing what mothers do. She was lying to make the unbearable bearable for 5 more seconds. 26 hours earlier, she had not known that the boy she was about to save would change everything. She did not know that the man whose blood she would shield her child from was Nicholas Rossi, a name whispered in hallways and feared in rooms where money and death lived in the same sentence. She did not know that watching security footage of her sacrifice, he would kneel beside his son's bed at 3:11 in the morning and whisper that this broken woman had called the boy brave, had held him like he mattered. All she knew was that everything had spiraled since yesterday. All she knew was rain and bruises and a child who could not stop crying. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Every comment you leave reminds us why we tell these stories, and every subscription fuels our purpose. Now let us go back to the beginning, to the moment 26 hours earlier when Mia Hartley had nothing left but $2 and the kind of exhaustion that settles into bone. 26 hours earlier. A Thursday morning in late August, muggy and thick, the kind of heat that sits on your chest and doesn't let go. Mia had worked the night shift at Vitoli's, a diner in the Mission District where the coffee was always burnt and the tips were always small. She worked that shift 5 nights a week, 6 when she could get them, coming home at 6 in the morning when Micah was still asleep, collapsing onto her mattress for 2 hours of fractured rest before he woke up demanding breakfast. This morning, she had $17 in her pocket. 17. A businessman had left a $5 bill without looking, his eyes on his phone, her invisible hands clearing his plate the same way they had cleared 1,000 other plates. She had pocketed it before the manager could claim his cut, which was stealing, technically, but the manager had already stolen her dignity and most of her wages, so the moral calculus seemed acceptable to her. $17 stretched across 3 days if she rationed carefully. Oatmeal for Micah's breakfast, a shared can of beans for lunch, crackers and peanut butter for dinner. She had done the math 17 different times, always arriving at the same conclusion: they would survive these 3 days. After that, the math broke down. After that, there were only 9 days left before the eviction notice deadline, and she still needed $150,000, and survival math stopped applying because survival became impossible. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom where Micah slept, a living room where she slept on a mattress she kept rolled against the wall during the day to make space for the couch, a kitchen that could fit 3 people if they didn't move, a bathroom where the shower didn't have hot water anymore. The walls had water stains shaped like continents. The carpet was stained with things she tried not to think about. But it was hers, or it had been hers until the landlord decided to sell the building to a developer, and now it belonged to someone else with plans that did not include her. She stepped into the apartment and closed the door behind Micah, locking it, her hand still moving through the motions of protection even though she could hear the footsteps in the hallway now, steady and unhurried. She moved to the kitchen table where the eviction notice lay, her eyes reading the red ink numbers even though she had memorized them days ago. $150,000. Due in 12 days. The language was polite. Legal. Impersonal. As if the removal of her family from their home was simply business, merely math, nothing personal. She had been served notice by a lawyer in an expensive suit who had looked at her the way people look at objects in their way. She was not a person to him. She was an obstacle. She was nobody. Micah tugged at her hand. His voice was small, uncertain. "Are those the bad men from TV?" She had no answer. She did not know if the men outside were bad or good or something in between. She only knew they had come for her, and whatever came next would depend on things she did not understand and could not control. The knock on the door came 3 seconds later. Not aggressive. Just a knock. The sound of a man's knuckles against wood, patient and inevitable as sunrise. She stood frozen, her hand still in Micah's hand, the apartment suddenly too small to contain what was coming through that door. The knock came 3 seconds later. Not aggressive. Just a knock. The sound of a man's knuckles against wood, patient and inevitable as sunrise. Mia stood frozen, her hand still in Micah's, the apartment suddenly too small to contain what was coming through that door. Her eye throbbed where Webb had slammed her face against the washing machine that morning. The other eye, swollen shut, made the world tilt sideways. She could not see clearly. She could not think. She could only feel the small fingers gripping hers and know that whatever happened next, she had to keep him safe. The knock came again. Slightly louder. The man's voice followed, deep and measured. "Mia Hartley? We need to speak with you. Open the door, please." She did not move. Her throat was still raw from Webb's hands. Speaking would hurt. Everything hurt. The apartment smelled like fear and the stale coffee she had reheated 3 times that morning because she could not afford fresh grounds. Micah pressed against her leg, small and terrified. "I'm calling through the door," she said, her voice barely a whisper, shattered like glass. "I don't have any money." "Whatever you want, I don't have it." A pause. Then, "We're not here about money, We're from Child Protective Services. We received a report that a child in this residence is in danger. We need to conduct a wellness check." The words hit her like a physical blow. Webb. He had called them. He had actually done it. He had threatened it in the basement, his hand around her throat, his breath reeking of whiskey and menace. "Call them myself if you don't cooperate," he had hissed. "Tell them you're unfit. Have them take the boy. See how you like that." She had not believed him. People did not follow through on threats like that. But Webb was not a normal person. Webb collected debts and destroyed people who could not pay them, and he had decided long ago that Mia Hartley's body was worth more than the $47,000 she owed him from Daniel's medical bills, from the treatment that had not saved her husband, from the funeral that had cost money they did not have. She opened the door. The woman standing in the hallway was younger than Mia expected, maybe 30, with kind eyes that widened when she saw Mia's face. Behind her stood a man in a polo shirt with a badge clipped to his belt. The hallway light caught the swelling around Mia's eye, the purple fingerprints on her throat where Webb's hands had left their signature. The woman's jaw tightened. "What happened to you?" "Accident," Mia said. The lie came automatically. There was no point telling the truth. Webb had never touched her before this morning. Before today, he had only threatened. And the law moved slowly. The law did not stop men like Marcus Webb. The law was designed by men like Marcus Webb. "May we come in?" or the man asked. They did not wait for permission. They stepped into the apartment, into the space that was all Mia had left of her old life, the life before Daniel died, before the medical bills began arriving like snow, before she understood that grief was a luxury item, that mourning was something you had to afford. Micah hid behind her leg. He was 5 years old and had already learned to be afraid of authority figures, of men with badges, of the adults who decided what happened to families like theirs. He had learned it from her. She had taught him that by being afraid. The woman knelt down, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Hi, sweetheart. What's your name?" "Micah," he whispered. "I'm Sarah. I just want to make sure you're okay. Are you safe here with your mom?" Micah looked up at Mia, then back at Sarah. His small hand reached out and took Sarah's finger, and Mia's heart broke into pieces because this was what it meant to fail at motherhood. This was the moment where everything fell apart. She had no money for rent. She had a violent man threatening her. Her child was about to be taken from her because she could not protect him, could not provide for him, could not be enough. "I'm safe," Micah said. "Mama keeps me safe." The words were so simple. So devastatingly true and completely false at the same time. She kept him as safe as she could, but safe was not enough anymore. Safe was an eviction notice with a 12-day deadline. Safe was $2 in her wallet. Safe was a man like Marcus Webb who believed that a woman's body was currency, that debts could be collected through violence, that fear was a legitimate payment method. Sarah and the man exchanged a look that Mia had seen 1,000 times. Pity mixed with professional distance. They saw a bruised woman in a falling-apart apartment. They saw a child who needed rescuing. They did not see the choices she had made, the sacrifices, the way she had worked double shifts at the diner on 5th Street, the way she had skipped meals so Micah could eat. They saw only what was visible: failure. Poverty. A life that had collapsed. "When did those injuries occur?" the man asked. "This morning. I fell down the basement stairs at my apartment building. It's old. The stairs are broken." Another lie. Another protection for a man who did not deserve protection. But speaking the truth meant opening a door that would not close again. It meant police reports and restraining orders and Marcus Webb deciding that if he could not have her cooperation, he would have his revenge. And revenge, in men like Webb, took terrible shapes. The woman stood up. She looked at the kitchen table where the eviction notice lay in its red inked accusation. 12 days. $150,000. A future that did not exist. "How long have you lived here?" Sarah asked. 3 years. Since my husband died. And you're being evicted? Mia nodded. There was no point lying about this. The paperwork was right there. The mathematics of her failure were public record, filed with the courts, guaranteed by law. "Is there family you can stay with?" "Friends." Mia had no family. Her parents were dead. Her brother had cut contact 5 years ago. The friends she had made before Daniel died had slowly disappeared, the way people do when you become inconvenient, when your problems require more than a coffee date to solve. Loneliness was not dramatic. It was just what happened when you ran out of money and stopped being useful to people. No, she said. Sarah wrote something on a pad of paper. The man continued looking around the apartment, cataloguing its deficiencies. The water stains on the walls. The threadbare carpet. The single bedroom where Micah slept and Mia slept on the couch because there was only one bed and children needed sleep more than mothers did. We're going to file a report, Sarah said quietly. Not for removal. For now. But Mia, you need to address these safety concerns. The bruises, the housing situation, all of it. We can connect you with resources. There are shelters that take families. Emergency assistance programs. We can help. Help. The word hung in the air like a promise that could not be kept. There was no help that would pay $150,000. There was no program that would make Marcus Webb disappear. There was no shelter that would keep him from finding her, from coming back, from collecting what he believed he was owed. After they left, after Mia signed papers and agreed to follow up with caseworkers and promised to keep her son safe, the apartment felt smaller. The walls pressed in. She sat on the couch and pulled Micah against her, and he did not ask questions. He simply held on, the way children do when they sense that something has shifted, that the ground beneath them has become less stable. Through the window, she could see the San Francisco streets below. The afternoon had turned gray. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon like something alive and hungry, pressing down on the city. The temperature had dropped. The wind had picked up. The weather report had said severe thunderstorms by evening. The kind of storm that knocked out power, that flooded basements, that reminded you how small you were, how fragile everything was, how quickly disaster could arrive. Micah fell asleep against her, his breathing slowing, his body going limp with the exhaustion of fear. She sat there in the growing darkness, watching the storm build, one hand on her son's hair and the other holding the eviction notice. At the same hour, across the city in a penthouse office on the 42nd floor of a building that bore his name, Nicholas Rossi was receiving a phone call that would change everything. His lieutenant Marco stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the approaching storm. In 15 years of working for Rossi, Marco had learned to read the man's moods in the smallest gestures, the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers drummed against his desk. Today, something was wrong. "Sir," Marco said, "we have a situation. Your son. He's gone." The words seemed to drop into the room like stones into still water. Nicholas Rossi did not move. His hands remained flat on his mahogany desk, his expression unchanged. But Marco saw it anyway, the moment of fracture, the instant where something cracked inside a man who did not crack. "Gone," Rossi repeated. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like the foundation of something immovable. "Gone where?" "The compound. During the shift change." He slipped away from his security detail. "We're searching now, but with the storm coming in, visibility is." "Find him." Rossi stood. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than most people's annual salary. A thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder of a betrayal from years ago, before Marco knew him, before the man had built his empire from blood and loyalty and the iron will to never be vulnerable again. "I want every resource dedicated to finding my son. Every man. Every resource. Do not come back until you have him." Marco nodded and turned to leave. But Ross's voice stopped him. "Marco. The boy's name is Micah. I named him after my father. The man who died because I was not strong enough to protect him. Do you understand what I am telling you?" "Yes, sir." "Then understand this. I will not lose another Micah. I will burn the city down first." Outside, the storm was coming. The wind howled through the streets of San Francisco like something alive, like a warning, like the sound of a life about to change completely. The rain hammered against the windows of Nicholas Ross's office like something alive, demanding entry. He sat motionless at his mahogany desk, watching the security footage for the 17th time. His hands were flat against the dark wood, fingers spread, a posture of absolute control. But control was a lie he told himself. The footage showed it all. A boy, 7 years old, frozen on a wet sidewalk. A black sedan. A gun resting on the window frame, barrel pointed at the child's small chest. And then, movement too fast for the eye to follow. A woman, bruised and broken, sprinting through rain that fell like bullets. Her collision with the boy. The gunshot that cracked the silence like lightning splitting wood. Her body spinning, shielding him completely as the round tore through her shoulder and exploded into brick. Marco stood behind him, silent. Theo stood beside Marco, equally silent. They had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only appropriate response to a man's world cracking open. Rossi froze the frame. He could see her face in that instant, rain streaming across features marked by old violence. One eye swollen shut, her throat wrapped in bruises the color of storm clouds. She was bleeding. She was in pain. And still she had not hesitated. "Find her," Rossi said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like the foundation of something immovable. "I want her name, her address, everything." "Who is she?" Marco shifted his weight. The movement itself was an admission of difficulty. "Boss, she disappeared into the Tenderloin. No ID on her." The boy Micah, his security detail lost her in the chaos. "By the time we reached the location, she was gone." "Then find harder," Rossi said. He did not raise his voice. The quietness made it worse. Midnight came. Marco returned carrying a folder the color of old documents. He placed it on the desk with the reverence of someone presenting evidence at a trial. Mia Hartley. 28 years old. Widow. One son, age 6, also named Micah. Husband deceased 6 months prior, motorcycle accident, complications from surgery, medical bills totaling $130,000. Current employment, none. Previous employment, fired from 3 positions in 4 months. Current landlord, Marcus Webb, owner of the Tenderloin complex where she occupied apartment for C. Rossi opened the photographs. Her apartment was smaller than his walk-in closet. The walls were bare except for children's drawings taped with masking tape that had turned yellow. There was a table holding an eviction notice, the deadline printed in red ink. 12 days. Below that number, someone had written a question mark as if unsure whether 12 days was enough time to fix a life. Financial status? Rossi asked. $2 in her wallet, Marco said. The photographs confirm it. $2.37 in a checking account. She has been eating from the restaurant's garbage for 3 weeks. Something cold and dangerous stirred in Rossi's chest, like a predator waking from sleep. He stood. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored suit that cost more than most people earned in 6 months. A thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder of the day his father died, the day he learned that love was a vulnerability that could be exploited. "I am going to her apartment," Rossi said. "Now." Marco checked his watch. "It is 1 a.m., sir." "Now." Rossi grabbed his coat, cashmere worth more than a year of her rent. "Have her door opened. I want to see where she lives." The Tenderloin apartment building smelled of mold and cooking oil and the particular despair of places where hope goes to die. Rain dripped from the ceiling in the hallway, creating small pools that reflected the dim emergency lighting. Rossi stood outside for C, Theo and Marco flanking him like shadows that had learned to walk upright. He knocked. The door opened a crack, chain still attached. A woman's good eye appeared in the gap, the other was swollen completely shut, the socket purple and yellow like a dying flower. Recognition flashed across her face. She had seen him on the street. The men calling him boss. The way they moved around him like planets circling a star. "I am not here to hurt you," Rossi said. "I am here because you saved my son." I did not know who he was, Mia whispered. Her voice was trembling like a candle in the wind, like something barely holding form. I would have done it for any child. I know, Rossi said. That is why I am here. Let me in. She did not move. Please, Rossi said. The word felt strange in his mouth, like speaking a language he had forgotten. He had not said please to anyone in 7 years. Mia unhooked the chain. The apartment was exactly as the photographs showed. Cramped. The furniture was worn, the carpet stained. A child slept on the couch, one hand clutching a stuffed animal that had lost most of its stuffing. On the table lay the eviction notice. Beside it, a stack of hospital bills held down by a coffee mug containing exactly $2 in coins and bills. Mia stood with her arms wrapped around herself, swaying slightly. Her left shoulder was dark with blood, her shirt torn where the bullet had grazed her. You are hurt, Rossi said. I cannot pay for a doctor, Mia said. I am not asking you to pay. Rossi moved closer, close enough to smell the rain on her skin, the soap she used that probably cost 99 cents. You took a bullet meant for my son. It grazed me, Mia said. Her voice broke on the second word. I am fine. Rossi stepped forward and lifted the torn edge of her shirt. The wound was deeper than a graze. It would scar. He could see that already in the way the skin had split, the way blood continued to seep. You are not fine, he said quietly. Why did you run? Mia's good eye filled with tears that she refused to let fall. Because I know who you are, Mr. Rossi. I know what you do. I do not want that near my son. I do not want him growing up knowing that his mother is connected to someone like you. Something shifted in Ross's chest, like an earthquake in a place he thought was solid. You think I would hurt you? After what you did? I think powerful men do not give without taking something in return. Mia pulled her shirt down, covering the wound. What do you want from me? Rossi looked at young Micah Hartley sleeping on the couch, thumb in his mouth, dreams moving behind his closed eyes. His own son had insisted on coming tonight. The boy was downstairs in the SUV, guarded by men with guns. He had said, I want to see the lady who saved me. I want to say thank you. I want to give you something, Rossi said. What do you need? Mia laughed, a sound like glass breaking. I need $150,000 in 12 days or my son and I are on the street. I need my landlord to stop putting his hands on me. I need my husband back. Can you give me that? The rain intensified outside, hammering the windows. Somewhere in the building, a siren wailed. The city continued its terrible, beautiful chaos, indifferent to the small moment happening in apartment for C. I cannot bring back the dead, Rossi said. But I can handle the rest. Why would you help me? Mia whispered. I am nobody. Rossi looked at the child on the couch, at the drawings on the wall, at this woman who had run toward danger instead of away from it. You are the woman who called my son brave, he said. You held him. You whispered to him that he was safe. Do you understand what that means to a boy who has spent his entire life being protected by men with guns instead of being loved by someone who simply cares whether he feels brave? Mia's jaw tightened. I cannot accept your help. I cannot owe you that debt. You do not owe me, Rossi said. I owe you. He pulled out his phone. Within 20 minutes, a private doctor arrived with a medical bag. The wound was cleaned, stitched, wrapped in gauze that cost more than Mia's monthly groceries. Young Micah Hartley woke during the process, confused, frightened. Mia held his hand and whispered, It is okay, baby. They are helping. They are good. The boy looked at Rossi with the directness that only children possess. Are you the man from the street? My mom saved your boy. Rossi knelt to the child's level. In that moment, he was no longer a mafia boss. He was simply a man kneeling in a poor apartment, speaking to a child. She did. She was very brave. My mom is the bravest, Micah Hartley said, and the words hit Rossi like a bullet to the chest. Before Rossi could respond, footsteps sounded in the hallway. The door to apartment for C swung open. Theo appeared, and behind him, small, dark-haired, with eyes exactly like Rossi's, came young Micah Rossi. The boy had slipped past the guards. He had insisted on coming upstairs. Micah Rossi ran directly to Mia and wrapped his arms around her legs. "You are the lady," the boy said, his voice muffled against her thigh. "You saved me. You held me and you said I was brave." Mia froze. Her good eye went wide. Slowly, carefully, as if handling something infinitely fragile, she knelt down and pulled the boy into her arms. "You should not be here, sweetheart," she whispered. "I wanted to say thank you," Micah Rossi said. Tears were streaming down his small face, and his voice trembled with a vulnerability that no 6-year-old should have to carry. "You held me like my nonna used to. No one holds me anymore. Since she died, no one holds me like that." Rossi watched from the doorway as this woman, who had $2 to her name, who was bleeding and exhausted and terrified, held his son the way he had never learned to hold him. She whispered into the boy's hair, "You are brave. You are so brave. You are loved." Something broke open inside Nicholas Rossi. Something that had been sealed shut since the day his father died on a rain-soaked street. He reached out and placed his hand on Mia's shoulder, carefully, avoiding her wound, and his son looked up at him with an expression Rossi had never seen before. Hope. The rain hammered against the studio windows as Sophie Langford sat perfectly still in the make-up chair, her reflection staring back at her with practiced confidence. Her cream-colored Chanel suit cost more than Mia Hartley earned in 6 months. Her diamond earrings caught the light like small stars. She had spent 17 years building this moment, the pristine image of a concerned developer, the voice of community protection, the woman who would expose fraud and save neighborhoods from predatory tenants. In exactly 4 hours, her television interview would air live across the Bay Area. In exactly 4 hours, everything would change. But Sophie did not know what was happening at that very moment in a nondescript office building 3 miles away. Marco sat in front of his computer screen, the security footage playing on repeat. Webb's hands gripping Mia's arm. Webb's mouth moving, his words like poison, "You spreading your legs for cash now." Marco's jaw clenched. He had worked for Rossi for 8 years and had seen many things, brutal things, necessary things, but something about this moment felt different. This was not business. This was personal. He picked up his phone and made a single call. "Boss," Marco said when Rossi answered. "You need to see this." 12 hours earlier, the rain-soaked lobby of Mia's apartment building had transformed into a stage for Webb's cruelty. He had cornered her near the mailboxes, his eyes narrowing when he noticed the white bandaging visible beneath her torn collar. The stitches on her shoulder, still fresh and red, told a story Webb did not understand. Money had been spent. Medical help had been obtained. By someone. Webb grabbed her arm, squeezing exactly where the bullet had grazed her skin. The pain shot through her shoulder like a blade wrapped in ice. Mia gasped, trying to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Someone help me," she said, her voice barely steady. Webb leaned close enough that she could smell the cheap whiskey on his breath. "Friday, Mia. 12 days is now 11. You do not have the $3,200 I asked for? Then I want you in my office, door locked, and we will discuss alternative payment plans." His fingers dug deeper into her arm. "You understand what I am saying?" She ripped her arm free, stumbling backward. "Do not touch me." But Webb was already turning away, confident that she had nowhere to go, no one to call, no escape from the corner he had painted her into. He did not see Marco watching through the glass door of the lobby, phone already recording, every word captured in crystal clarity. Marco's expression did not change. He simply pocketed his phone and walked back to his car. Meanwhile, in a gleaming penthouse overlooking the bay, Sophie Langford was putting the final touches on her conspiracy. Her team had worked through the night, and the results were perfect. Fabricated photographs showing Mia accepting envelopes of cash from unknown men. Doctored police reports suggesting drug activity in her apartment. Fake testimonies from paid actors claiming to be neighbors who had witnessed neglect, heard screaming, seen suspicious activity. Every piece of evidence was designed to paint Mia Hartley as precisely what Sophie needed her to be: a criminal, a fraud, a threat to the community. Sophie had scheduled the interview for tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock sharp. Slumlords and tenant fraud, exposing the real predators in our housing crisis. She would appear sympathetic, concerned, a woman of conscience exposing corruption. The moderator had already agreed to feature her evidence on screen. By tomorrow night, Mia's name would be synonymous with fraud. By tomorrow night, no landlord in the city would rent to her. By tomorrow night, her reputation would be ash. Sophie smiled at her reflection in the mirror. She had spent her entire life learning how to destroy people and make it look like justice. That evening, as the storm continued to rage outside, Mia stood on the roof of her apartment building, 6 stories above the street. The rain was relentless, cold, punishing. It ran down her face and mixed with tears she did not remember starting to cry. Her shoulder throbbed. Her eye had swollen shut again despite the ice. The bruises on her throat had deepened to black and purple, the shape of Webb's hand still visible on her skin like a permanent reminder that she belonged to him. The eviction notice was in her pocket, soaked through with rainwater, the red-inked deadline blurring but still visible, 12 days remaining. She had $2 to her name. Both were spent now on milk for Micah this morning. She was 32 years old but felt ancient. Her hands were calloused from years of scrubbing other people's dishes, other people's floors. Her back ached from double shifts. Her heart ached from something deeper, the weight of believing that she had failed, that she would always fail, that Micah would be better off without her. The state would take him, she thought. They would place him with a real family, a family with resources and stability. A family that did not live in fear. A family that could actually provide. She stepped closer to the edge of the roof. The wind howled around her, and the street below was a blur of headlights and rain. One step. Just one step, and it would all be over. The debt would not matter. The eviction would not matter. Webb would not matter. Her foot slipped on the wet concrete. Her arms windmilled. For one suspended moment, she was falling, and then her hand shot out and caught the metal railing. She gasped, pulling herself back, her entire body shaking. And then she heard it. From somewhere below, from her apartment 6 floors down, a child's voice floated up through the rain. Micah! Singing the song she had taught him, off-key and uncertain but unmistakably, impossibly sweet. The melody climbed through the storm like a prayer. Mia closed her eyes. Her whole body went still. Rain streamed down her face, mixing with tears, and she heard her son singing and she understood something fundamental about survival. It was not about being strong. It was not about being worthy. It was about someone needing you so completely that your own darkness became secondary. She stepped back from the edge. I am coming, baby, she whispered into the rain. I am coming. At that same hour, in an office on the 42nd floor of a downtown tower, Nicholas Rossi sat in absolute stillness and watched Marco's footage. The image was crystal clear, Webb's face twisted with contempt, his hands on Mia's arm, his voice dripping venom. Webb's recorded words from earlier that week were also there, phone calls discussing extortion, property seizures, the systematic extraction of money from desperate families. Ross's jaw was granite. His dark eyes were fixed on the screen with an intensity that made his men nervous. He did not move. He did not speak. When he finally reached for his phone, his voice was quiet, which meant it was dangerous. Marco, he said. I want Webb. I want Sophie Langford. And I want them both destroyed before sunrise. At midnight, 12 men in black tactical gear moved through San Francisco like ghosts. They moved with precision, with purpose, with the kind of coordination that came from years of loyalty to one man. They hit Webb's office first, the battering ram splintering the door, officers pouring in with weapons drawn and faces expressionless. Webb was inside, files spread across his desk, evidence of his entire empire of extraction and cruelty. He looked up, his face draining of color, his voice cracking. "What is this?" Marco stepped forward, boots heavy on the carpet. "Your reckoning." Every file was seized. Every hard drive was confiscated. Webb scrambled for his phone. Marco crushed it under his boot with a single decisive motion, the device shattering into plastic and circuitry. The message was clear. "You are finished." The next evening, Sophie Langford sat in the television studio with her hands folded perfectly in her lap. The camera lights were hot and bright. Her makeup was flawless. Her Chanel suit was pristine. The host, a woman named Patricia Chen with kind eyes and a reputation for thorough journalism, began the interview with the kind of gentle tone that made Sophie believe she was being treated as a hero. "Ms. Langford," Patricia said, "you have brought us some very explosive evidence about tenant fraud in San Francisco's housing crisis. Can you walk us through what you have discovered?" Sophie smiled, leaning forward with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences. "Yes, and I have proof that." The studio monitors flickered. The broadcast feed cut to black. Across every screen in the city, the billboards in Times Square, the streaming platforms, the social media feeds that millions checked each morning, a different video began to play. Security footage, crystal clear, shot from multiple angles. Webb in the lobby, his hands on Mia's arm. Webb's voice, recorded and unmistakable, discussing extortion. His threats about payment plans. Financial records displayed in meticulous detail, showing Sophie's shell companies, the properties seized, the families destroyed. Then came the text messages. Thousands of them. Sophie's voice, written out in black and white, "Frame her. Make it stick. By tomorrow night, no one will touch her." Webb's response, "The evidence is ready. She will be finished by 8 o'clock." The studio descended into chaos. Sophie stood from her chair, screaming, her perfectly maintained composure shattering like glass. "Turn it off. Turn it off." But the footage kept playing. On every screen in the city, her crimes were being displayed in real time, viral, unstoppable. Her phone exploded with notifications, board members resigning, investors pulling out, news outlets picking up the story and running it on every channel. Her own publicist, a woman named Jennifer who had worked for Sophie for 6 years, stood and walked away without speaking. The gesture said everything. Patricia Chen's face showed nothing but professional concern, but her eyes held something darker, the satisfaction of a journalist who had just witnessed truth triumph over manufactured narrative. Sophie's carefully constructed empire did not crumble. It collapsed. It burned. It evaporated, leaving nothing but ash and the sound of her screaming. At dawn, FBI agents arrived at Webb's apartment with federal warrants and expressions of grim determination. Webb tried to run, 3 steps toward the bedroom, then agents tackled him to the ground, pressing his face into the carpet, cuffing his hands behind his back. The lead agent, a woman named Director Hayes with silver-streaked hair and a permanent expression of exhaustion, read the charges in a voice like thunder. "Marcus Webb, you are under arrest for extortion, assault, racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy. You are looking at 40 years federal prison." Webb's face crumpled. His voice broke into desperate pleading, "Please, I can pay. I can give you names." "I can?" "We already have the names," the agent said flatly. Mr. Rossi was very thorough. By noon that same day, every contact Webb had ever made, loan sharks, corrupt inspectors, complicit lawyers, city officials he had bribed, received their own visit from federal agents. The network that had protected Webb for 15 years evaporated. His money was frozen by court order. His properties were seized. His phone numbers were blocked. He was transported to county jail in handcuffs, photographers snapping his tear-streaked face, his mugshot appearing on every news outlet by evening. Meanwhile, federal agents raided Sophie's penthouse simultaneously, moving through her home like an invading army. Computers seized. Files confiscated. Bank accounts frozen by emergency court order. Criminal charges, conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, money laundering. But Rossi had ensured her punishment would not be the mercy of prison. It would be something far worse, the complete and total destruction of everything she had built. Her name became synonymous with corruption. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Board members issued public statements denouncing her. The country clubs that had hosted her galas for 2 decades sent formal letters of expulsion. Her social media accounts flooded with evidence of her crimes, shared and reshared until the volume was deafening. News outlets ran documentaries about the housing fraud scheme she had orchestrated. Academic papers were written about her methods. By Friday morning, Sophie Langford had ceased to exist in any meaningful way. She was a cautionary tale. A name whispered in disgust. A symbol of corruption exposed. By noon that same day, every contact Webb had ever made, loan sharks, corrupt inspectors, complicit lawyers, city officials he had bribed, received their own visit from federal agents. The network that had protected him for 15 years evaporated like smoke. His money was frozen by court order. His properties were seized. His phone numbers were blocked. He was transported to county jail in handcuffs, photographers snapping his tear-streaked face, his mugshot appearing on every news outlet by evening. The glass doors of the federal building reflected his hunched shoulders as agents led him past reporters screaming questions. His designer suit hung loose on his collapsing frame. 40 years federal prison. The words echoed in the holding cell where they placed him, stripped of his watch, his rings, his dignity. Meanwhile, federal agents raided Sophie Langford's penthouse simultaneously. They moved through her home like an invading army, their footsteps heavy on Italian marble floors that had cost more than most people's entire houses. Computers seized. Files confiscated. Bank accounts frozen by emergency court order. Criminal charges, conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, money laundering. But Rossi had ensured her punishment would not be the mercy of prison. It would be something far worse, the complete and total destruction of everything she had built. Her name became synonymous with corruption. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Board members issued public statements denouncing her. The country clubs that had hosted her galas for 2 decades sent formal letters of expulsion. Her social media accounts flooded with evidence of her crimes, shared and reshared until the volume was deafening. By Friday morning, Sophie Langford had ceased to exist in any meaningful way. She was a cautionary tale. A symbol of corruption exposed. And while the cities buzzed with the scandal, while news outlets ran documentaries and academic papers were written about Sophie's methods, Mia Hartley woke to silence. No threats. No eviction notice. No fear crawling through her chest like a living thing. She lay in the darkness of her small apartment, listening to her son breathing softly in the next room, listening to the absence of danger. For 7 years, sleep had come with one ear alert, her body tensed for the next crisis. She had forgotten what peace sounded like. On the kitchen counter sat an envelope, slipped under her door sometime in the night. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind that whispered money with every fiber. Inside was a deed. Her apartment. Transferred to her name. All debts cleared. No mortgage. No landlord. No one who could take it away. A note in elegant script, written by a hand that had never known hesitation. You are free. N.R. Mia sat on the cold floor and broke open. The tears came like a dam rupturing, years of held breath and held terror finally releasing. She was free. The word meant nothing and everything. She was free. That afternoon, there came a knock at her door. Nicholas Rossi stood on her threshold wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than her old yearly salary, his dark eyes carrying the weight of 17 years spent destroying the men who had threatened her. Beside him was a boy, small and dark-haired, pressing against his father's leg with the caution of a child who had learned to trust nothing. "Can we stay?" the boy asked, his voice barely audible. "Please?" Mia looked at Rossi, confusion flickering across her face. "I do not understand." Ross's jaw tightened. His voice came out low, controlled. He has not stopped talking about you. He asked me this morning if you could be his mother. Micah Rossi was 6 years old and had not slept well in months. But when she had held him in that diner, when she had whispered that he was brave, something had shifted inside his fractured small heart. She smelled like cookies and warmth, and she had not let go. Mia knelt to meet the boy's eyes. "Sweetheart, I am sure your father can find someone." "I do not want someone better," Micah interrupted, the words tumbling out with the desperate clarity of a child. "I want you. You held me. You said colors for sad days, and you looked at me like I mattered." The boy buried his face in her shoulder. Mia looked up at Rossi, helpless. His voice cracked like thin ice. His mother died when he was 2. He does not remember being held like that. He stepped closer, and the air between them grew heavy with the weight of what he was asking. "You gave him something I could not buy." That was how it began. Over the next weeks, Rossi visited every afternoon. He watched Mia read to both boys, her Micah and his Micah, curled up on either side of her on a worn couch that had seen better days. He watched her teach them to bake, flour dusting their noses, laughter filling the small kitchen like a sound she had not known the apartment could make. She sang off-key and they corrected her, and Rossi stood in the doorway, his shoulders a fraction less rigid than they had been since the day his father died. Young Micah Rossi started calling her Mama when she was not listening. In the garden one morning, playing with toy cars, he whispered to his brother, "Mama said we can plant flowers tomorrow." Mia heard it. She froze, wooden spoon suspended over a mixing bowl. That evening, when Rossi arrived, she pulled him aside. "He cannot call me that." "Why not?" Rossi asked, as though the answer was obvious. "Because I am not his mother." Rossi stepped closer, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "You are already his family. You have been since the moment you chose him over your own safety. A gun was in the room, Mia. You had $2 in your pocket. You had everything to lose. And you still chose him." Over coffee at her small kitchen table, Rossi told her the truth he had never spoken aloud. He was 14 years old when his father Michael Rossi bled out on a street corner in North Beach. A rival had wanted the territory. A single gunshot. Michael Rossi had died on cold concrete while his son watched from across the street, frozen with the helplessness of a child who was not yet strong enough to save anyone. Nicholas had spent 17 years building an empire on that wound. Methodical. Relentless. He had found the man who pulled the trigger and dismantled him piece by piece, his business, his family, his mind, until there was nothing left but a breathing corpse. And still it had not filled the absence. "And then you ran toward a gun," Rossi whispered. "You did not run away. You chose him instead of yourself." "Mia, I would choose any child." "Rossi, I know. That is why I am choosing you." He took her hand, and his grip was gentle, the grip of a man learning, for the first time, that not everything had to be seized by force. "I have spent 17 years trusting no one. But you had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and you still chose us." The proposal was not romance yet. It was family. Rossi asked her to move into his home, a sprawling mansion in Pacific Heights with ceilings like cathedrals and views of the entire bay. To let him protect her and her son. To be the mother his son was already calling for in the darkness of his bedroom at night. Mia resisted. "I will not be bought." "I am not buying you," Rossi said, and his voice held something that sounded like desperation. "I am asking you to choose us again. The way you did in the rain." Young Micah Rossi overheard from the hallway. He ran in, his small body moving with urgency. "Please say yes, Mama. Please. Say yes." The word, Mama, broke her open like an egg. She looked at this boy who had no mother. At Rossi who had trusted no one for 17 years. At her own Micah who deserved safety and a future that did not require him to count pennies. She whispered the word that would change everything, yes. 6 months later, Mia stood in the garden of Rossi's estate, watching both Micahs play in the summer sun. They were building something with blocks, a castle, they said, though it looked more like a tower leaning at an impossible angle. Rossi approached from behind, wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned into him, her head fitting against his chest like it had always belonged there. "I thought love was what I had before," she said quietly. "Safe. Predictable. Easy." Rossi buried his face in her hair. "What is it now?" "It is running toward the gunfire," Mia whispered. "It is choosing trust when you have been broken. It is letting someone see your scars and believing they will not add to them." Young Micah Rossi ran up, hugging her legs. "Mama, watch this." He did a cartwheel, clumsy and joyful, landing in a tangle of limbs and laughter. Mia knelt and gathered him up, and in that moment, with this boy in her arms and Rossi beside her and the San Francisco sunshine warming her skin, she understood something that had taken her entire life to learn. She had never been nobody. She had always been exactly who she needed to be. Rossi kissed her temple. "You gave me something I lost the day my father died." "What?" she asked. "Hope," he said. "Hope that the world has people who run toward danger instead of away. That love is not just what you build. It is what you choose." That evening, the four of them sat on a blanket in the garden as the sun bled gold across the bay. Mia had made lasagna, her mother's recipe, and they ate with their fingers and laughed when sauce dripped on their shirts. Marco and Theo watched from the stone terrace, two hardened men in their 50s, watching their boss smile without reservation or calculation. "Never thought I would see the day," Theo murmured. Marco smiled. "Which day? That he would trust someone? Or that he would let his guard down?" "Both," Theo said. "All of it." The rain came that night, soft, cleansing rain that fell on the city like forgiveness. Inside, the four of them were warm, together, home. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, but it sounded different now. It did not sound like danger. Every day we choose between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. Mia Hartley chose trust when she had every reason to choose fear, and in doing so, she built a family from the fractured pieces of two broken worlds. If this story touched your heart, do not just watch or share it. Someone you know needs to hear that courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act anyway. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in Mia's place. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about love that defies the odds. And remember, the bravest thing you can do is choose to love when the world tells you to run. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you all good health, joyful lives, and days filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.